All right, so welcome back to the third session. This is looking right inside the cluster of dots. Next, so this is where we're going to go. And each of those are going to be named now. So, are not each of them, just a few examples of some of those. So if we talk about green neighborhood, as sort of a middle pattern between patterns that are larger than that. So if we look at municipal permaculture and all the different categories that municipal permaculture can be expressed in, and one of those is green neighborhood. And then within green neighborhood, we can talk about all these other patterns. They can be expressed in different ways. So if you want to build a green neighborhood, you go through the pattern language and you select out the patterns that you think will be best for that green neighborhood. So here's some examples. There's water cascade, microclimates, local co-ops, green buildings, educational renewal, because we want to reorganize our educational system, local food, fiber, and fuel, and so on. So, and this is just an example. Normally we'd have maybe 2 or 3 dozen patterns in order to begin to express what should be made and coordinated together in a project. So if we look at what green neighborhoods could look like then, we just need to add some more visuals here. Here's an example of 50 acres of an eco-village. So there's a lot of different patterns assembled here in different ways. There's streets, there's neighborhoods, there's a garden farm, there's live, work, and sort of retail commercial areas, there's service areas, there's management of stormwater in what we call water cascade now. And livable streets, and so forth. Different kinds of housing, so there's a whole mix of housing. Some of these patterns are actually from Christopher Alexander's work. Others, like local food production in this microfarm, are certainly from a permaculture pattern language. So we're beginning to be able to mix these languages together. I just love this lower one. This is what we call a pocket neighborhood. Probably pocket neighborhood should be a pattern where you've taken down the fences or you just soften the lot lines at the back and have common land behind the houses. So we begin to have a garden, an orchard, we could have a workshop, we could have a campfire circle, and then access pathways through the whole rear yard, which is all geared to improve the quality of life for people in that neighborhood. They can begin to understand what safety is with each other. They can supervise the whole area. They can gather there. Children can go and play there. You can have young and old people commuting together, and a lot less grass to mow. So, and it can be productive. It can be, growing local food and fulfilling some sort of service function within this area. And this is what we're looking for in terms of the design of new green neighborhoods. And it doesn't have to be in a suburban environment. It can be in an urban environment. This is a sort of street design called a woonerf. How many people have heard of woonerf? It's from the Netherlands. It's a design approach from the Netherlands to make streets less car dependent and more pedestrian friendly. And so we put in psychological and physical barriers to cars, green them. It becomes more of an outdoor shopping area, more of a communal area, so that the streets actually become more pedestrian. And this is certainly a viable pattern within permaculture. I love this one where you can grow your food and order your food in a restaurant right across the sidewalk. And basically, as we know, a lot of permaculture comes down to growing food, and so we want to make every opportunity that there is to do that. If we take local food, fiber, and fuel and see what sort of patterns emerge from that, there's many different ways of growing local food, fiber, and fuel. You can do it individually yourself, you can do it as a group, you can hire somebody to run a micro farm, you can have farmers markets that bring in food from nearby. So there's many different patterns that fit in local food, fiber, and fuel. And what does that look like? Well, we all know what farmers markets look like. We can begin to have livestock in the city within reason. Certainly, we can have chickens in our backyards in more and more municipalities now. And our backyards themselves can be permaculture yards. And that is another pattern that's emerging. Is this sort of relaxed, semi-natural, and whatever your vision is for your property, you can be growing food, or you can be creating habitat, or just a place to read books in the summertime. Maybe you could be reading the pattern language in these landscapes, and certainly actually outright growing food and hiring a farmer that specializes in intensive agriculture right in the city. Let's take a look at green buildings. So these are some of the patterns associated with green buildings. We're looking at pantries and kind of designing our spaces in houses to fit with the evolving environmental movement. So we can look at pantries now. Certainly renewable energy is part of the house construction usually. We can look at kitchen gardens, laundry lines. We definitely have to look at solar orientation. So this is just some of the patterns that emerge from looking at green buildings. And what does that look like? So there's definitely a larder. Does anyone recognize this landscape? Home Alive at Everdale. That's right. And this landscape is nicely maturing now. That was in 2003, so that was 15 years ago. It was implemented about 14 years ago. So that's a 14-year-old permaculture yard that's producing herbs, perennial vegetables, annual vegetables, fruits, nuts, berries, everything. This is a summer kitchen. Of course, not everyone needs that sort of elaborate summer kitchen, but it's the idea of being outdoors, of kind of living more outdoors. And if you're going to be processing food or making something that would heat up the house unnecessarily, you can do that outdoors now. And that becomes part of your indoor-outdoor living space, which is definitely part of a new pattern. Maybe it's not a new pattern. We probably had that a long time ago, but we're rediscovering it. And that's a bioshelter. So bioshelters are essentially super insulated greenhouses. That's a standalone structure. That can be part of a building. So you have a building facade up here, and that could be internal within the facade of a south-facing building. There's many different ways of expressing this. Food preserving. So how many people are getting into preserving foods, fermenting foods, canning, like a lot of people are doing that? So let's have our architecture reflect that. And drying foods, actually, here's a tiny little pantry, doesn't take up much room. That can be part of house design now. And so that should be part of a new pattern for green buildings. Green household. So we're kind of moving into the social cultural, kind of the new expression of social cultural. Neighbor's Path is an interesting little definition of what living in the environmental age is. And the answer is, does anyone know the answer? Well-worn paths to our neighbors. That's sort of one indicator of living sustainably. I'll get into the family table in a minute. Living in the garden, that's sort of that outdoor living that's important. And shifting enterprise. I'll get into that in a second. So family table is an interesting pattern. It just doesn't mean gathering your family around you in the living room. It means actually accepting other people into your family, sort of accepting the idea of extended family. In other words, drawing your circle wide and bringing those who are alone or in need or whatever their association might be. We're kind of thinking globally in terms of almost a global culture, a global family. And so that's an interesting pattern to think about. Emerging enterprises. So enterprises that contribute to the green economy. And so have a meaning at the end of the day in terms of living sustainably. That can be part of a green household. And I actually put in some grafting, an image of grafting fruit trees, experimentation, sort of doing things, finding out what new varieties of fruit trees there might be or whatever, contributing to that within the larger community that's working on that. Be part of a green household. And of course, thinking of more than just humans, thinking of what else we're reliant on. The whole biology, what we do on a farm is also part of a greater household, a greater environmental household that we are dependent on. And so we're just admitting the fact that we're living in a council of all beings, and they can be part of our household. Water cascade. This is an interesting one because its actual place is probably way up at the top, because water cascade means it can be expressed in so many ways. It's basically taking water at the highest elevation and making the best use of it as it moves through the landscape until it finally gets infiltrated into the ground or taken out by a perennial river course of some kind or a lake. So we're kind of capturing that water and making the best use of it rather than just letting it dump right out. So these are all different patterns associated with that. Rain pond. I like the idea of a natural swimming pond or a little natural swimming a plunge pool. Solar showers, enhanced infiltration. In fact, you can use micro swales to drain water to help you irrigate your gardens. And so that's all part of water cascade. And that's what this is beginning to look like. This is a rain garden or a swale in the city. This is a technology for biofiltering human waste and recovering the nutrients and using those and recycling those nutrients in a safe way in our food producing systems. This is for growing fish in a greenhouse. And of course, does anyone know who this gentleman is? P.A. Yeomans. Who said that? Yes. And so this is a picture of P.A. Yeomans standing beside his keyline irrigation swale. And this has to be from Australia, demonstrating where he is putting his flags for water to fill up in here until it overflows and floods the area down elevation from that swale. And then when that's irrigated, he lifts up the flag and goes to the next one and lets that fill up and overflow. And then he goes to the next one, lets that fill up and overflow. And that's how he irrigates land in a very cost-effective way. And so that's influenced everything we're talking about in terms of keyline these days. And so it's just basically an efficient way, and it's part of the water cascade that we're making the best use of water as it moves through the landscape. And of course, we can incorporate these ideas into green neighborhoods. And that is it for our third section on examples of patrons.